For centuries, people have told and retold the story of a massive flood that supposedly covered the entire Earth. The most famous version is the biblical tale of Noah's Ark, in which only one family and a boatload of animals survived. While flood myths can hold deep cultural or spiritual meaning, it's worth asking, could a worldwide flood really have happened? When we turn to what geology, archaeology, genetics and history tell us, we find that such a global event is logically and scientifically impossible. In this video, we'll look at 4 major reasons. 1. There simply isn't enough water on Earth to submerge every mountain. 2. Geology shows no single worldwide layer left by a universal flood. 3. Ancient civilizations show continuous histories around the supposed time of such a flood. 4. Human genetics reveal no sign of a recent bottleneck from a small post-flood family. Along the way, we'll see how each piece of evidence fits together, painting a clear picture that contradicts the idea of an entire planet underwater. Not enough water on Earth. It's easy to imagine a heavy downpour, but what about rain or water powerful enough to cover towering peaks like Mount Everest, over 29,000 feet high? Where would that water come from? And where would it go when the flood was done? Total water supply. Adding up all water in the oceans, ice caps, rivers, underground reservoirs, and even the atmosphere still wouldn't come close to submerging every continent and mountain on the planet. Vanishing act. If water once appeared in such vast amounts, it had to disappear afterward. Yet no natural process could remove that volume of water without leaving undeniable evidence. It's like filling a bathtub to the ceiling. There's simply nowhere for the extra water to go. If you wonder, but maybe there's a hidden source. Geologists have found no trace of any extra reservoir big enough to account for a planet-wide flood. No global flood layer. Think about what happens when water overflows a riverbank. Sediment, the dirt, sand and pebbles carried by water, settles out in a recognizable layer. A global flood would leave behind one giant layer of sediment across every continent at roughly the same point in time. What we actually see. Geologists study rock formations all around the world, and nowhere do they find this single uniform deposit that would match a worldwide deluge. Instead, they see billions of years of stacked rock layers formed by countless local floods, volcanic eruptions, shifting plates and more, each leaving behind its unique signature. Why it matters? If there really was a global flood, this flood layer would be unmistakable. The absence of any such global deposit strongly suggests there never was a planet-wide submersion. Ask yourself, if water once covered everything at the same time, shouldn't we see the same muddy or sandy band in the ground everywhere on Earth? Unbroken civilizations. Another major clue comes from history and archaeology. If all humanity was wiped out except for a single family, you'd expect to see ancient cultures vanish at roughly the same moment, then re-emerge later from a single source. But that's not what the evidence shows. Continuous records. Civilizations like those in Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, and the Indus Valley have unbroken histories across the very time some date the worldwide flood, often around 2300–2400 BCE. Their building styles, art and pottery show gradual evolution, not a sudden stop and restart. No missing years. Archaeological layers don't reveal a catastrophic break, no sign that entire populations disappeared. Instead, we see ongoing transitions from one period to the next. Ask yourself, if every person on Earth truly died except for a tiny group, wouldn't we notice a dramatic cultural reset in places like Egypt or China? Genetics and human diversity. Genetic bottleneck is a term scientists use when a species shrinks to a very small population. Afterward, the entire group that descends from those survivors has far less genetic variety, like trying to build diverse puzzles from just a few pieces. No recent bottleneck. Modern human DNA studies reveal that we carry deep, varied genetic lineages going back tens of thousands of years. There's no sign of a near-extinction event just a few millennia ago, which we'd see if we all came from one boatload of people. Global spread. By the time of the supposed flood, humans had already settled in the Americas, Australia, and many remote parts of Asia. If those populations were wiped out, we'd expect clear evidence of total repopulation from a single family in the Middle East, something genetics does not support. So, if the story were literally true, we'd all share an extremely narrow family tree within the last few thousand years. But that's not what the data show. What about flood myths everywhere? Many cultures, Sumerians, Greeks, Hindus and others, have versions of big flood stories. It makes sense that local catastrophic floods, especially around large rivers, would be remembered and retold. Over generations, these tales often grow into epic stories of near-total destruction. To ancient communities, a flood that submerged their entire region might as well have been the whole world. Putting these points together, limited water supplies, no global flood layer, continuous civilizations, and the genetic record, it's clear that a literal worldwide flood wiping out all life is scientifically and logically impossible. This doesn't mean floods never happened. On the contrary, local floods have plagued humanity throughout history and likely inspired the dramatic myths we know today. Acknowledging this evidence doesn't have to diminish the cultural or spiritual value people find in flood stories, but it does remind us how important it is to distinguish symbolic myths from literal history. Next time you hear about a global flood submerging every mountain, just remember, the Earth's own records, from its rocks, ancient sites, and our DNA, tell a very different story. And that's Baldy's thoughts on why a planet-wide flood, as described in many myths, simply doesn't hold water. Subscribe for more.